All right, I think we're going to get started. Thank you everyone for coming. This is our 7th lecture, so we're super excited about it for our fall 2012 season. Generous support from the Lowell Institute allows us to have these fabulous programs every year for free, so we're very grateful for their support. My name is Gina Parenti, and I'm the coordinator of the lecture, so if you haven't already, please sign up for our mailing list. We love to send out updates about surprise guests or, for instance, changes in location. We normally are in the Ocean Center in the Learning Lab. Tonight we're super excited that we had such a great turnout that we had to come to the IMAX, so that's great. To continue with the aquarium's mission, we offer recycling and composting as part of our refreshment service, so we always ask that you look before you throw something away. Our next lecture will be Thursday, November 29th. About plastic, and we have a representative coming from the Surfrider Foundation. That will actually be in our normal space, which is in the Harborside Learning Lab in the Ocean Center, where we normally are. And now for this evening's lecture, I would like to introduce Bud, who is the president and CEO of the New England Aquarium. He's been at the helm of the aquarium for 7 years. Prior to his amazing work here, he worked for the World Economic Forum in Geneva, Switzerland, where he led a group of 25 global business leaders in advising former Prime Minister Tony Blair on climate change issues. Before that, he led the Union of Concerned Scientists for 23 years, where he oversaw their programs on climate change and energy policy. Please help me welcome Mr. Bud Ris.
The other way to say that intro is he's been working on climate change for too goddamn long.
It's still changing.
It's still changing. Yeah. So I am very, very happy to welcome everybody here. As Gina mentioned, we were going to have the lecture where we normally had it, have them down in our Harborside Learning Lab, but we had 3 or 4 times as many people sign up as that room will hold. So welcome here. And this is a subject that's of great interest to us here at the aquarium for a number of reasons. Probably the most important is that, as you'll hear from David and me later on this evening, and you probably know already or heard from others, the oceans are very much on the front lines of the impacts of climate change. And the effects are going to be quite profound going forward in the future. And then secondly, the New England Aquarium here leads a nationwide collaboration of about 40 aquariums and zoos working together to figure out how best to communicate this issue to the visitors who come to see the animals in our institutions. So how do we talk about this issue on our exhibit floors? And there is this big nationwide collaborative working together on that and trying to do it better than I've been doing it for 25 years. So hopefully we'll succeed. In terms of format, I'm going to show a few quick slides illustrating current trends related to climate change. Then I'll turn the floor over to David Arnold for the bulk of this evening's program. And we'll have some time, hopefully, for some Q&A and discussion after David's talk. David is currently co-producer of a photographic exhibit on climate change called Double Exposure: Photographing Environmental Change. It's an exhibit now on a national tour. He's working on a second exhibit focusing on the health of coral reefs. You will have the good fortune to see examples from both exhibits this evening. Some of you may also know David from his 25 years at the Boston Globe, where he was a staff reporter of some 2,000 stories, many of which chronicled his most unusual exploits, including a flight in an F-18 fighter jet, a trek in a submarine 19,000 feet up the base camp to Mount Everest, and a dive 2,000 feet down in the Cayman Trench in the Caribbean Sea. I've been up a helicopter with him, and I can assure you he loves hanging over the side a lot. I was strapped in. So I want to share just a few graphs and charts with you that will, I hope, set the stage for the photographs that David will show in his presentation. What we're both going to show you does not make for a happy story, unfortunately. It's very clear that what was once considered a potential problem for the distant future is now already upon us. In some cases, the changes are small and incremental. In others, as you will see, they are more dramatic. And it's not always possible to isolate climate change as a cause, but again, as you will see, a pretty clear picture appears to be emerging. There's some good news, though, and that is that we have solved many tough environmental challenges in the past. And there are many things that we as individuals, corporations, institutions like the aquarium, and governments can do to solve this great environmental problem that we face. And it's not a problem that suffers from the lack of technology or feasible solutions. So that's the hope. And perhaps we can talk more about that during the Q&A session. So let me get started. And again, I'm just going to show a few slides, and most of which are graphs and charts. Is this working? I don't want you to worry about whether you can read the scales. It's the direction of the charts that I just want to point to, again, to try to help set the stage for David's talk. Is there anybody here who feels like they could not explain climate change to the person sitting next to them? Half of you are lying. There you go. Okay, so Climate 101. You ready? 30 seconds. There's a blanket of gases around the Earth. The principal one is carbon dioxide. If you have just the right amount of gases in that blanket, it keeps the Earth just the right temperature. Add more gas, it becomes a comforter, sometimes like a heating blanket. When you burn oil, gas, or coal, you burn carbon, it combines with oxygen, and you release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which thickens the blanket of gas. Now can you explain it to your neighbor?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So over the last 650,000 years, that one can document looking at various ways of taking ice cores and detecting the amount of carbon that was in the atmosphere, you can see that there's a lot of fluctuation over time. However, since the advent of the Industrial Revolution in about 1850, we've begun burning a lot of coal, oil, and gas. And as you can see, where we are on the chart now is way, way up. It's actually off your screen on the right at almost 390 parts per million, something we haven't seen in nearly 650,000 years. So we have a problem. We now take temperature readings at more than 1 million locations around the globe. There are 3 principal places, scientific institutions in the United States and in the UK that take these measurements and compile them. And as you can see, they all agree, there's an obvious slope here that the temperature of the Earth is rising. The temperature of the Earth, the average used to be about 57 degrees. It's now almost 58 and a half. This makes it a little bit easier to see. This compares decadal changes with the average from the period in 1960 to 1990, and as you can see, the last 3 decades are quite an interesting trend. It is definitely getting warmer. That's the average. Here in New England, winters are now about 4 degrees warmer than they used to be. And for a lot of reasons that are too complicated for us to explain this evening, the further away you get from the equator, the further you get closer to the North Pole, the more the temperature change. So the temperature changes are more dramatic further up north, which is important for what David is going to talk about later. If you heat up the atmosphere, within 100 kilometers of the Earth, you're also going to heat up the oceans below it. And this slide is also way too complicated to read. They don't take it at 1 million places, but they take it at many hundreds and thousands of places, also measuring the heat content of the ocean down to about 700 meters. The oceans are warming as well as the air above. What happens to water when it warms? 8th grade physics, who knows it? It expands, exactly. So if you heat up the entire oceans all around the world, that water has to go somewhere, and it's going to go up. It certainly was in the news a lot with Sandy in New York. As the sea level has risen in Manhattan over the last century or so, it makes Manhattan Island, Brooklyn, and New Jersey adjacent to that more vulnerable to storms, as we certainly saw in the last couple of weeks. What's happening right here in Boston Harbor? The harbor sea level has risen almost a foot in the last 100 years. A big part of that is subsidence. A lot of Boston Harbor and where we are right here is built on fill, and that compacts over time. But in the last several decades, the rising of the seas is more caused by the warming of the oceans, the melting of glaciers, increased freshwater runoff, and so on. It is now rising globally on average at about 3 millimeters a year, which is about a foot per century. So, if that holds, we will probably at least see another foot here in Boston Harbor. And then finally, 2 last slides. I lied, I actually have 7 slides, not 5. But this shows you the extent of sea ice up around the North Pole in mid-September when the ice is at its minimum. It's been melting every summer as it does because it's warmer in the summer just as it is here. So by September, the ice is at its minimum. And if you look very carefully here, you can see what is a very, very disturbing trend. This is square kilometers over on the left side. This is a big problem for marine life because many animals like polar bears are dependent on ice flows and sea ice for food, for their habitat, and any number of other things. We set a record, unfortunately, this last September. The sea ice in September at its lowest point in the year was 49% less than the average of the last 40 years. So this is the red line, which is the mean of the extent of sea ice around the North Pole. This is Alaska over here, just so you get your reference point. This past September, we set an all-time record, and the amount of ice was almost less than 50% of its normal average. So Houston, we have a problem. David Arnold.
So I got into this game totally backwards. I worked for many years, for a quarter century actually, with the Boston Globe. And this guy, the late Brad Washburn of the Museum of Science, and I knew each other only because the man who took this photograph of Brad and his wife on their honeymoon on the top of Mount Bertha at 10,000 feet was Tom Winship, who was my former editor at the Boston Globe, which says something about Tom's stamina and the honeymoon. Brad has a famous photograph of climbers on the Golden Horn. And when I left the Globe in 2003, I was doing these wonderful stories, jumping off things, writing adventure stories, and I thought, what the heck, if global climate change is real, I will take a copy of Brad Washburn's photograph with me and take a little time off from doing the story I was reporting to actually go see what this scene looked like today. But this is the scene of that same picture now. This is side by side. And there is, in this photograph, no rock at all except for right there, whereas you see a lot of rock here. This rock is about to slide away. And the substantial change at 11,000 feet was something that really surprised the climatologists when I came back in 2005 and shared this picture. Now, this is your lucky day because Bud showed you 7 charts. I'm only going to show you 1. And you have to know that there was a horse trade here before this. I was going to get the substantial part of the hour, and Bud was going to handle the Arctic ice cap. But nevertheless, I'm only going to show you 1 chart. And this is another way of looking at the Arctic ice cap, and this was last year's figure. This figure now is down, the red line has now dropped down to about here. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about just what that all means. The significance of this slide, and the reason I broke my word with Bud, is that all of these little scribbles, these are all the computer forecasts for what would be happening to the climate, the Arctic, the ice cap melting, the storms, sea level rise, all of that. We are outpacing the most dire forecast. And these were the forecasts that Al Gore did his movie on. And back then, he was blamed for being shrill, for being an alarmist, for being a sore loser, and yet he grossly lowballed what is actually happening. It's fascinating to me. I've only learned this recently. Science is of all probability. Only math is certainty. So I can't tell you for sure, nor can anybody else tell you where this melt is going to end. But I'm betting you that it's going to be right down around here. So I'd say we're going to be, the ice cap will be totally navigable in the summer by about 2020. That's just a guess. The Earth has melted and gone through transitions umpteen times. 56 million years ago, there was no ice. Turns out now, National Geographic has a pretty good story on it. It turns out that only partially can you explain the warming of the Earth by looking at how much carbon dioxide was in the air back then. Obviously, it wasn't released by humans, but geologic changes released carbon dioxide. 56 million years ago, that probably detonated a rash of carbon dioxide released in the methane that is buried in the tundra. It's frozen. It's in an innate state. So what the fear is that with our fossil fuel burning, we are going to detonate a similar runaway situation. And I just want to say, it's really hard to stand here and talk to anybody and not sound shrill, because it's not cool to be an alarmist. But this gets me worried. This change happens to be back in the Eocene. That change took tens of thousands of years. And now we're looking at change in perhaps 200, 250 years. 97%, more than that, 97.5% of the climatologists who most frequently publish in peer-reviewed journals say humans are driving the change. And I just ask anybody here, if 97 out of 100 doctors told you that you needed surgery or you were going to be in big trouble, you'd go get the surgery. I would. So my focus tonight is to talk about the acceleration of the change. And as my good friend Steve Coit so articulately said to me once, we are talking about needing to get to acceptance. Not acceptance that we're going to have to live with this. Science shows us many ways, or shows us the primary way out. Acceptance that we are in trouble. And when we accept that, when we get to that level, somewhat like a disease, then we can all sit and say, okay, we're going to have to do something. So I am using photographs to try to drill home the idea of acceptance. Just a couple of glaciers here. I know we're at an aquarium and I should get to the corals. But this is, I just threw in a couple of glaciers here. This is the Goyo Glacier in Alaska. The scale of Alaska is phenomenal, and I'm sure many of you have probably been there, but the state of Connecticut would fit in Brad's picture here. The entire state of Connecticut, we're missing a little over here, but you get the idea. This is 5 miles across, the terminus of this glacier. This is another glacier, the Tyndall, going up off to the right. And this is what the glacier looks like now. This is ground fog. This is not ice. This glacier has receded all the way up. It's about 12 miles. It's gone that way, broken in half. The folks at the National Ice Data Center helped me calculate that the amount of fresh water that is melted out of here would supply all of New York City's water needs for 47 years. Now, I'm going to take you just occasionally to the views from my place because I live nearby. It takes me about 800 steps to get here. This is a view of all of the oil coming in as I'm looking out my window. And I just want to mention one additional thing to what Bud mentioned. And that is that we are adding about 3% carbon dioxide every year to the atmosphere. That's a doubling. That will be a doubling of less than 30 years. Think of sitting in a car on a sunny day with the windows rolled up on a pavement. That is exactly what's happening. The heat not all the heat can escape, and your windows are getting thicker by 3% every year. Gasoline weighs 6 pounds. When you put a match to it, it goes poof, you get a little bit of water out of it, and you get carbon dioxide. A 6 pounds, 1 gallon of gasoline will create 18 and change pounds of carbon dioxide. And so it's very easy to figure out, when you figure out our energy balances, how much everybody's adding to the system. So, having said that, let's just, a couple of other quick ones. This is the Matterhorn. After a major snowstorm, this is Zermatt, Switzerland. And this is what it looks like now. Almost shot to the same minute. I was very proud of this one. And side by side. The significance thing here is that you've got not only much less ice there, but you've also got all this dirt here in the apron of the mountain. That is, in fact, rock that has flaked off the north face of the Matterhorn. North faces of mountains, particularly this elevation in the Alps, in Alaska, should stay frozen all summer. That's, in fact, how the engineers designed the cog railways, so that you don't get the ceilings of the cog railways over there were supposed to stay frozen. Now they leak, now they rain, now rocks fall down on the trains. Very dramatic, but it has changed the whole engineering scheme over there. This is the Shoup Glacier. When Brad flew over it, this is Washburn, when Brad flew over it in 1938, this glacier actually went, and you can see this on maps, it went 5 miles that way. It was just gigantic. It's located fairly near Valdez, Alaska. And this is what it looks like now, and side by side. The Nunatak Glacier, also in Alaska. And this photograph is just so, this is Brad's picture, 1938. It's just such an intimate little glacier to me. And you can really get the sense what's happening here is as the ice flows down very slowly, it scrapes along the edge and picks up dirt. And that's a lateral moraine that we need to get into the nomenclature here. But this is just a beautiful medial moraine as the two sides converge. You just get these wonderful ribbons. You see them all over the place in Alaska. And this is what it looks like today, and side by side. What's kind of cool about it is that when Brad flew over it, you can tell that the glacier advanced, because a glacier sits there when it stops its growth, it just pumps dirt out onto the ground, and that's called a terminal moraine. And this is where the glacier had actually advanced to after Brad flew over it. And then it has started this big recession back. Now, before I leave Alaska, I'm going to try the impossible here with Gina as my backup. But I want to show you one thing, because this is important to look at Gina already get up saying, oh, he's going to need help. Okay, now, there we go. Okay, now, but I can't get to the stop. Yeah, but, that's not right. Okay, so I just want to show you, I'm really curious. How many people have seen this graphic? Okay, about a fifth of the room. My focus here is acceleration. So this is real temperature averages over the globe from, it says 1914, actually it goes all the way back to 1880s. Blue is colder than normal, red is warmer than normal. And I want you to watch what happens, particularly from about the late 70s to present. This goes all the way to last year, so we'll just let it run here. Mid-70s here. This puppy really begins to burn now.
Wow. Oh my
That's those are real averages. So the reason I had you talked about Alaska, you know, how do I, Gina, do I get out of here by hitting that thing, right? Yeah, okay. Just gonna hit this. Okay, so just to get out of, I just want to go to that last scene. Sorry about the cutting off here. Bush pilots are in Alaska. They are fly with a bush pilot when you want to get there in the worst way. And there's a T-shirt to that effect. I spent a lot of time with them. What you just saw in that animation is this slide here, 1977-ish. And on that animation, I won't replay it because it will never get out of here, but you can see a warm spot already showing up over Alaska. And I promise you, if that animation was to run from there, that doesn't get any colder. That stays warm. And the bush pilots were cool because they would say, well, you know, we really began to sort of notice things changing in the late 70s. And trucks that would normally go over snow bridges, the snow bridges were breaking down. And I just find it amusing that, well, this is not a science presentation. This is a David Arnold takes a trip presentation. I think that kind of correlation is always really interesting. Now here we have the last slide. This is last year, as it's rapidly warming up. And now you're my audience, so you're allowed to speak out. What do you need? What are the prime ingredients for making a storm? Big storm. You need heat, and you need moisture. You need water. Your heat, air holds 5% more moisture every degree centigrade that it goes up. So you've got the makings here for some pretty bad things to come. Now, I told you science is probability. I'm not going to tell you that the drought is going to go away next year, but I don't see a whole lot of hope that we are going to be getting out of that drought or getting more storms anytime, or getting less storms anytime soon. And that's why this is not an environmental issue. This is the economy. Spending $50 billion for Sandy. I know we can't say that that's climate, but it's weird. $300 million for the drought this year for a bailout. This is a public health issue. All the little bugs that can live through the winter now that couldn't live through before that carry this nasty stuff. These nasty diseases. Geopolitical for sure. 13 of the 20 largest cities in the world, 13 of them are on the water. And these sea level rise estimates, by the way, only account for the thermal expansion. They don't account for any of the water actually melting off Greenland and Antarctica. Because the IPCC, the UN organization that's been trying to educate the world about this, you just can't estimate how much water runoff there's going to be. So they just stick with the conservative thermal expansion, and obviously it's they lowballed it. But that is that's something to factor in as we think about the future. And I just have to, my 7th grade science teacher was a guy named Mr. Richardson at the Belmont Hill School. He would be aghast that it's taken me this long to figure this out. He really would be. So, we are at an aquarium, and I've got a half an hour or less. So let's go to reefs. This is a shot from 1995 taken by a guy named John Brooks of St. Croix down, it's on Buck Island National Preserve. And I was curious about corals, and I started this project about 3 years ago. I was curious about corals only because I'm lucky enough as a kid to have gone snorkeling down there, not in St. Croix, but in Jamaica once, and it was just a cabaret of colors. I just couldn't believe it. This was back in 1967. This is what the scene looks like now. And side by side. And this was a real shock to me, because it's one thing to be up in an airplane 3 miles over and looking at this analytical melting going on, but it's another thing to look at coral reefs dying. The coral is an animal. It builds this little calcium carbonate home. Every year it accretes, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger. That's a hard coral. And it's the hard corals that are suffering around the globe. 40% of them are dead or dying or on the way out. And let's quit at that for now. This is taken by a guy named Jerry Greenberg back in 1980 of his daughter. Jerry, still very much alive, diving, was a National Geographic photographer for many years. And watch this nubbin right here, because it's what the scene looks like now. Jerry's actually holding the photograph that he just looked at, and side by side the pictures.
That's Florida Keys, right?
That is, thank you very much, that is Key Largo, Dry Rocks Reef in the Florida Keys. I have basically photographed the Caribbean and the Florida Keys. Hopefully there'll be opportunity to go farther west at some point. This was typical. What I did was go to old dive magazines and find gorgeous pictures of features that I thought I just might be able to find again. And this was a real reach. This is near Peter Island in the British Virgin Islands. And I included just because it was such a gorgeous shot. And this is, it's a little bit of I can explain if you care, but this is what the scene looks like now. And side by side, this ridge right here is this ridge right here. And I won't go into all the problems, all the challenges of underwater photography, but you're shooting with a very wide angle lens, so you move 4 inches and the whole perspective changes. This is Sue Thompson holding the original picture. She does everything down in Tortola. She's a chiropractor and a veterinarian, but she's also a dive guide with 8,000 hours. And she said to me afterwards, she said, I wouldn't have believed it had I not seen this happen over time. This is 1989, and this is 2011, I think I was there. But she said something else that really stayed with me. She said, just because we can do it, doesn't mean that we have the right to do it, whatever it is, if you can afford it. Do you have the right to do it? And that has really stayed with me in so many ways. This is the Rome Reef down in the British Virgin Islands. And if you watch this pillar coral in particular, that's what it looks like today. Not only is the coral decaying, but you also have this powder of white that is everywhere. And I mentioned that the coral is an animal. It is basically born with a little tiny single-cell plant in it. That there's a great exchange that takes place between the animal and the plant, and they both thrive. When you get a temperature shock, when you get a big thermal event, the coral spits out that little plant. That plant is the color. That is the color that gives coral its color. And coral then just turns white. And if you don't cool the water off fast, then the coral dies. But I want you guys to just look at these two pictures and tell me, what's the difference? What is one of the bigger differences other than the color? What's the difference here? No fish. No fish in my picture. Now, I thought, honestly, when I started this project, I thought fish were like Finding Nemo, that they would go all across the Pacific and nobody ever stayed put very long. Fish don't go, fish just hang out. They know what home is, and they just stay there the whole time. And so when we look at why is this happening, you've got to divide between the local pressures and the global pressures. And overfishing is a huge local pressure because the fish actually eat the gradu algae that settles on everything underwater. And if you overfish, you take away the cleaning mechanism for the coral and you kill it. Overfishing is the primary reason that the corals are dying on a local basis. You've also got nutrient runoff from golf courses being built. You also have just total disregard for coastal development. This happens to be the British Virgin Islands. Great place to go sailing, sailing capital of the world. Not one boat has a holding tank. They pump the poop directly into the ocean. There's no regulation. Then you also have the global pressures. Heat shocks, the intensity and the frequency of bleaching events. It has gone way up in the last 15, 20 years. Then you have acidification. Carbon dioxide, you burn that gallon of gasoline, puts out 18 pounds of carbon dioxide. A third of it, maybe a little more, goes right into the ocean. Now, I can't explain, somebody says the word ion to me, and I go out. But take my word for it, the acidity of the ocean has become more acid, some 30%, in the last, I think it's 20, 25 years. Now, if you want to know what acidity does to a calcium carbonate shell, just take a shard of egg shell, next time you have your hard-boiled egg, and drop it in some vinegar. It disappears. So, I was going to say something else, but I've forgotten. I do want to mention that when we talk about overfishing, it is fairly well known that a coral reef to stay healthy needs, per square meter, it needs about 500 grams of fish per square meter, just on an average. That's to keep the coral clean, to keep it thriving. We're down to about 20 grams per square meter. So overfishing, I cannot stress enough. This is down in Discovery Bay in Jamaica.
It's German.
And this is a grid that's used, and this picture was taken in 1979. This is the way they were measuring just how we're doing with just the day in the life or the year in the life of a coral. And I just ask you to watch this pin right here that was anchoring the grid, because you can see the pin right here. Oh my God. And side by side, this is what the pictures look like. I'm going to just go through a few of these quickly. This is another Jerry Greenberg picture, also down in the Florida Keys, and this is what it looks like today. Jerry is actually this guy right here swimming. This is a several hundred-year-old coral, brain coral. And you never touch coral now, but back in 1982, when this picture was taken by a guy named Steve Lucas, they weren't thinking about that kind of thing. And just in passing, I just have to tell you, one of the challenges of photographing these reefs is that most of the dive operators are really, they want to help. Some of them don't. Doesn't matter that the corals are all dying, they just know the corals are going to get bad publicity and you won't go diving. And this happens to be in the Florida Keys. So I shot this picture last year, and the guy dropped me off at the wrong coral head, and I was dumb enough that I didn't realize I was actually not looking at brain coral. So when I posted this on the coral listserv, people said many nice things about the way that I'm comparing coral, but at least 4 people called in and said, you don't have a brain coral over here. I do now. In fact, the picture I had was not anywhere near as severe as this. That is exactly the same angle. And the brain coral is so atrophied, it's just become a substrate for the soft corals that are growing out of it. It'll be gone in 10 years. This was a coral, by the way, that people used to, divers used to, when they got married, they'd take their spouses or fiancés or whatever down and have the picture taken next to the thing because it was so old. Another shot. This is the wreck of the Rhone down in the British Virgin Islands, and this is Key Biscayne down in Florida. And the significance of this picture is divers sometimes, and I'm not in any way defending diving. It's just, for me, it's only a tool to take pictures. But divers are often blamed for wrecking the coral. And the significance of this picture is that when John Brooks took this back in 1995, this site had long been, it's called the Wreck of the Fowey site in Key Biscayne National Park. It was off limits for diving back then, so divers never touched this spot. And that's what it looks like now. I'm going to drill this home to you, so I don't want to keep going on this. These are staghorn corals back in 1980, and that's what the site looks like now.
Where's that?
That was in South Carrisford Reef off of Key Largo. This is another spectacular picture from Jamaica. Just a beautiful, beautiful elkhorn coral. 1979, and this one is a shocker. This is what it looks like now. And side by side. This happens to be an old picture of Bonaire. You wouldn't see this kind of coral down there anymore. But it begs the question, why do we care? Why do we care? If you don't dive, if you're not a tourist, if you don't go underwater, who cares about the coral? It is, by comparison, on a superficial basis, it is a natural defense against sea level rise. It is an economic source for a lot of third world countries. 25% of the fish are based in, they are born and they hang out in these corals. 25% of the fish in a world that is going from 7 to 9 billion people. But to me, the most significant reason that I care about coral is that it surrounds the Earth at the equator. It goes 20 degrees north, 20 degrees south. Now, the ocean holds 98% of the biomass on the planet, which is just, there's a lot of plankton there. 98%. The ocean produces half of the oxygen we breathe. And these corals are very, very sensitive. And they are, to me, and I'm sure to institutions like this, they are the canaries in the coal mine. They are saying something is really wrong with the water. And if you reflect back on the animation of the world getting redder, if we don't turn this puppy around, it's going to get worse. I was about to say a lot worse, but I'm trying to hold it back. The average earthling deposits 2,800 pounds of carbon every year in the atmosphere. The average earthling. The average American deposits 44,000 pounds of carbon in the air every year. We lead the world, yet we have no national plan. Zip for cutting back. We per capita are the worst offenders. And even drug-torn Mexico has a national plan to reduce the carbon footprint. So this is where you're probably expecting me to tell you what you should do, what you are doing wrong. I'm going to talk, because it's a lot easier, about me. And this is my rather incredible view from where I live, at least a few of these pictures are. And I just want you to know that I inherited this boat. Thank you, Dad.
Oh, I thought you meant the other one. It's going no way, man.
That boat, I used to drive 40 hours a summer. That boat at cruise burns about 7.5 gallons an hour, 120 pounds of carbon for me to take that boat per hour. This is my daughter, skiing, which we love to do. I have a friend who drives a snowcat at Jackson Hole. Jackson Hole uses 10 snowcats, 2 shifts, 100 gallons of diesel every shift to groom the trails. 20,000 pounds of carbon dioxide every day so that I can ski on groomed trails. This is just right next door. This is called Codzilla. Codzilla takes tourists out for a splashy ride. That boat burns 40 gallons of diesel every trip, takes 8 trips. That's about 7,000 pounds of carbon. This is the view from my place. This is about 2 months ago. This is a charter boat called a Majestic, and you can look up on the web. Majestic charters for 10 people. A tank full of diesel is 33,000 pounds of diesel. That translates to 725,000 pounds of carbon dioxide that boat puts out per tank. So the 10 people can cruise in trendy splendor. 31 countries emit less carbon dioxide per year than that boat does on a tank. And I venture to say, before I poke fun at those people, or Codzilla, or the people who drive the snowcats in Jackson Hole, that they probably have no idea what this means. So, money talks. Gas went to $4 dollars a gallon, and all of a sudden, I find, I'm sorry to admit this, for economic reasons, primarily for economic reasons, I drive that boat now maybe 10 hours a summer. It's become my big, expensive Adirondack chair. It just hangs out in Gloucester. And it's pretty good, doesn't it? I'm no worse for wear there. I own a Prius. I bought it in 2005, and I bought the Prius because it just made economic sense. So money talks, I listen. The solution is, science says, is very clear. You've got to get off the fossil fuel diet. You can't add things up in the atmosphere. I happen to be standing in front of a guy named Les Kaufman who tells a very funny story about Biosphere 2, which is in the late 90s, middle 90s, out in Texas. The idea was to enclose 2.5 acres in glass. Anybody remember Biosphere 2? And Biosphere 1 was the Earth. Biosphere 2, the idea was to totally enclose it, put plants in there, then you generate your own oxygen and CO2, and it becomes a totally enclosed area. And I don't know, several months into the project, There were 6 spherians, biosphereans, whatever you call it. They were all fighting each other. They were sick. They were hungry. They had divided into 2 camps, and finally the whole thing just blew up emotionally.
Well, the peyote may have had something to do with it.
So if we can't bioengineer 2.5 acres, the idea of putting sulfates up in the atmosphere strikes me as a very risky proposition. And it does nothing about the carbon dioxide that you would continue to put into the ocean. There is, in the hiking world, there is a phrase called bending the map. Bending the map is when you realize that you are getting lost, and you look at the map and you think, maybe that's it over there. You get more and more lost. And it's been proven often, there are amazing studies on this, that the people who bend the map as hikers are the ones who die. And bending the map, you can use the metaphor for sorting out marriage, corporate issues, a lot of things. As long as we continue to bend the map, we are never going to get there. Science makes it very clear, get off of fossil fuels. For that, we need political will. For that, we need to stop providing subsidies, tax breaks to oil companies, make gas cost what it really costs, which would be twice what it costs now. And believe me, you're all part of the 47% because every time you fill your car up, the government is paying half of your gas. The oil companies aren't even paying a pollution tax. And I don't even go there. So we got to stop burning fossil fuels. So what do? I joined 350.org. The good news is that they're here tonight in town. It's a growing organization. Fossil fuels and who gets the money and who doesn't is a pet voting project for me. It's really easy, frankly, to vote when you have one leading issue, and my people won. The question I ask anybody running for school committee, anything, what are you going to do about a climate issue where people are actually going to show some leadership? Now, it's awfully easy in this game to just say, oh, you just aren't going to be able to change. We're not going to get government to actually get. You can't get into government. The oil companies are too big. We aren't going to change our habits. And besides, it's just a lost cause. I have a new friend. His name is Wally Bratton. Wally runs a tour fishing boat, 60-footer. And I asked him to take his quick shooter camera about 2 weeks ago out to photograph a particular body of water. And I'm sorry, this is a quick shooter picture, so it's not very clear. You're allowed to speak up. Where is that? I'll be amazed if anybody gets it.
Quabbin Reservoir?
Quabbin. Gloucester. This, where Wally Bratton takes everybody, his tourists, is 2 miles inland of Lake Erie. It is the Cuyahoga River.
Oh.
This is what the Cuyahoga River, watch the railing here, this is what the Cuyahoga River looked like in the 1950s and the 1960s when we had 6 to 8 inches of sludge on top of the river. It was declared dead, it was suffocating, and everything below it was dead, and nobody ever thought it would come back. Nobody ever thought it would come back. And this river gave birth to the Clean Water Act, championed by a Republican president with a total bipartisan support of Congress. Same thing happened with the Clean Air Act. So, in closing, I go through stages of ignorance, sadness, anger, despair, and I'm at acceptance now. But it can be devastating. And I recall the power of the consumer and the voter, and I recall the power of the individual. And I think of Rachel Carson, 50 years ago. Diminutive lady, turned the pesticide world around, had a lot to do with the atmospheric testing stopping for the nuclear experiments. That lady never said, we can't do it. Science says it's really clear. Now, if Rachel Carson, as an individual, can affect that kind of change, and Arlo Guthrie taught us that you get 3 people, you get yourself a movement. Then I ask you, please, join me. Thank you.